We begin with President Trump backing away from the brink of war with Iran, saying he will respond to Tehran, targeting U.S. forces in Iraq with economic sanctions and not military force. First reported by the Washington Post, a senior administration official confirms to NBC News that when it became clear Tuesday night that there were no casualties, the president told his top advisors in the Situation Room that he did not want to escalate the crisis. He began his address saying, quote, "As long as I am president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon." And then he addressed the attack.
I'm pleased to inform you the American people should be extremely grateful and happy. No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties. All of our soldiers are safe. Our great American forces are prepared for anything. Iran appears to be standing down, which is a good thing for all parties concerned. Nations have tolerated Iran's destructive and destabilizing behavior in the Middle East and beyond. Those days are over. Iran has been the leading sponsor of terrorism, and their pursuit of nuclear weapons threatens the civilized world. We will never let that happen. As we continue to evaluate options in response to Iranian aggression, the United States will immediately impose additional punishing economic sanctions on the Iranian regime. These powerful sanctions will remain until Iran changes its behavior. The civilized world must send a clear and unified message to the Iranian regime. Your campaign of terror, murder, mayhem will not be tolerated any longer. It will not be allowed to go forward. Today, I am going to ask NATO to become much more involved in the Middle East process. The American military has been completely rebuilt under my administration at a cost of $2.5 trillion. U.S. armed forces are stronger than ever before. Our missiles are big, powerful, accurate, lethal, and fast. Under construction are many hypersonic missiles. The fact that we have this great military and equipment, however, does not mean we have to use it. We do not want to use it. American strength, both military and economic, is the best deterrent.
Willie, before getting to the speech, I think I should probably ask, is Britney Spears still a thing, or should I use another singer?
I think she's got the residency in Vegas, but we're going to have to update your references going forward. But proceed.
Let me know. Let me know. I want to at least be like 2007, 2008
Is the president
relevant.
okay?
Yeah. So Willie, that speech, I believe, I'm curious to see what you and the rest of the panel think. It was measured by Donald Trump standards, and I would even argue that it was measured by the standards of any American president after Iran launched, a couple of dozen missiles into a U.S. base. It does seem as if the president understood, despite the tough talk, which, again, I would suggest any American president would use the day after, despite the tough talk, despite the increased economic sanctions, this was a noticeable step back from war, and there wasn't the level of gloating that we feared going into the speech yesterday.
Yeah, if you look at that speech through the prism of Donald Trump's presidency and his personality, more than that even, I think the world was holding its collective breath as he walked out. What was he going to say? What was he going to do? It was a sigh of relief at the end of it, frankly. I mean, he did not escalate. He obviously blamed President Obama. His obsession with President Obama continued for things with some bad facts in there. But the fact that this was tamped down, Jeffrey Goldberg, I think most analysts believe was the right thing to do, but was certainly not inevitable given who Donald Trump is, that he could have come out and said, you fire rockets, ballistic missiles at our bases, we're going to hit you back one more time. The fact that he, according to Jonathan's reporting and others, immediately said, I think we've accomplished what we want here. Let's go out and sort of put this to rest. It was a relief to some people.
Right. Well, that was yesterday. Today, tomorrow can bring a completely new set of policies regarding Iran, depending on what provokes him and what doesn't provoke him. So just keep that in mind, that real-time analysis gets overcome by events. It's important to note that we probably weren't heading to what people think of as all-out war with Iran anyway, because Iran is smarter than that. Iran is not going to go into a face-to-face confrontation with the United States. The United States can destroy Iran. Iran cannot destroy the United States. But what he's promising, what the president is promising, is something that can't be promised. This is part of a continuing low-grade war that's been going on. If you want to go back to 1979, you can. And you're going to see, I'm sure that in Tehran right now, there are many, many Iranians and the IRGC, other organizations, thinking of more clever ways to hurt America, hurt American allies. In particular, our allies in the Middle East are incredibly frightened right now. A, because they know that Iran has the possibility, the capability of hurting them through proxies indirectly. And B, because they don't know what the President of the United States, who does not have an affection for allies, they don't know what he's going to do when the next round comes. So we're in a pause right now, and we're not going to war, which is great. But the low-grade war is going to continue in various ways, and we don't know if he's subtle enough to manage that.
So, Jonathan.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.